Hi, my name is Matt Shimberry. I'm a senior software engineer on the StarCraft 2 team, and I'm here to give you a quick tour of one of our latest modules, the Cutscene Editor. The Cutscene Editor allows you to create and manage all of the cinematics and other scripted sequences found in your map. In fact, it's the exact same tool we use to create all of our cutscenes, conversations, and mission briefings found throughout the entire Heart of the Swarm campaign. In this tutorial, we'll be creating a cutscene to go along with the map that Brett created in the first tutorial, so make sure you're familiar with that before beginning. You can also check out the Cutscene Editor guide found on StarCraft2.com. This tutorial is going to be broken up into 6 major parts. First, I'll be giving you an overview of the entire cutscene and all the controls. In the second part, we'll be adding models and doing some basic animation. In the third part, we'll talk about the director node and do some basic camera work. In the fourth section, we'll be adding the dialogue and building out the story of our cutscene. In the fifth section, we'll be fine-tuning the scene and really giving it some polish. And finally, in the sixth section, I'll show you how to add your cutscene to your map and play it back in the game. Before we begin, let's take a quick look at the cutscene we'll be creating.
What are they doing here? Tell me, Zagara, how would you drive the Terrans from this world?
I would obliterate their fortress.
We need to move fast. I'm taking control of the Hive Cluster right now. Let's test out these new banelings.
To begin, you can open the Cutscene Editor by going to the Modules menu and selecting Cutscenes. You can also open it from the toolbar icon up here. You'll then be greeted with a window that looks something like this. Now, there are several major parts to the Cutscene Editor. In the top left, we have our library. This shows all models, sounds, and other assets available to add to your cutscene. And this includes everything you find in Wings of Liberty and Heart of the Swarm. Now, you can type up in here to filter this list by whatever you type in. So in this case, we're going to look for Story Mode Kerrigan. So this Kerrigan infested with light is what we want. I double-click it, and you'll see it adds Kerrigan to the center of the screen. Now this is the viewport. Some major camera controls you should get familiar with. Mouse wheel in and out will zoom in and out on the current scene. You can also use button 4, the one near your thumb, to retarget the camera. You can zoom in again, this time with Shift middle mouse drag. They both work. You can use Alt middle mouse to orbit around the current target. You can use Control middle mouse to pan in camera space. And then finally, you can use Control Alt middle mouse for a mouse look. This is really important to get familiar with the various camera controls, because you'll need them when setting up your cameras for your cutscene. The next major part of the Cutscene Editor is the scene list. The scene list here shows all of the cutscenes and all of the objects in each cutscene that's currently in your map. This also includes all of the cutscenes found in Heart of the Swarm. So feel free to play around and take a look at how we created some of our cutscenes. The scene list also acts as a filter for the timeline below. Whatever is selected up here will show on the timeline below. And that's the real meat of the editor. In the bottom left here, we have the actor timeline tree. This is what I like to call the what of the Cutscene Editor. What objects are in your scene, and what are they doing? Each of these items is called a node, and you can right-click them to open up a context menu unique for each node type. For instance, this actor model node here, when you right-click it, you can add an animation layer or a conversation, which we'll be doing later. On an animation layer node, you can right-click it and add additional animation blocks. To the right here is the timeline itself. The top is the timeline ruler. You can click and drag here to set the current time of the timeline. You can also use spacebar to play and pause. You can use mouse wheel in or out to zoom in and out of the timeline. And you can use middle mouse drag to pan around. Below that is the actor item timeline. Each item here is called an element, and that represents the when of your cutscene. When is the model visible, and when are the animations playing? You can click and drag any of these elements here to change the current time that they're active for. For instance, this red block here says when the model is visible. So if I move it out here and play the cutscene from earlier, you can see Kerrigan becomes visible when the red block is hit. In a similar way, this blue block here is the animation element and says when the start time of the animation is. You can see as I drag it around, the viewport above is changed because the current frame of the stand animation is different. Finally, we have the property sheet to the right. The property sheet shows all the properties available on the currently selected object, whether it's an element or a node. As your selection changes, it will update the property sheet. You can double-click in here and change any value in the properties sheet. For instance, I can turn off blue to give Kerrigan a bit of an orange hue. I can always undo these values to get back to my original value. There's a lot of properties here in the property sheet, so I can't go over all of them. However, feel free to play around in here because you really can't break your scene, and at worst, you're only an undo away. So that's an overview of the cutscene editor and all of its controls. In the next part, we'll be adding models and doing some basic animation. Now we're going to be adding models to our scene and doing some basic animation. All right, so up until this point, everything we've done has been in this special previewer cutscene. The previewer cutscene is a special workspace designed just for previewing purposes. It's not an actual cutscene that would be placed in your map. To add a new cutscene, go to File, New Cutscene. And yes, we want to add this to our map. This will add a new entry here under Document Files. And notice you can have multiple cutscenes in your map that you can play at any time. So I'm going to rename this scene here by hitting F2 or right-clicking it and choosing Rename to Kerrigan Ambush Tutorial. Notice how this one here is a darker color than the rest. That's because that's the currently active cutscene. You can right-click any other cutscene and choose Activate to make that the currently active one. You can only edit whatever scene is currently active. I'm also going to push this button up here called Toggle Active Scene Only. What this does is it only makes the current scene visible so that I don't have the other objects in my view. I don't need them right now. All right, so with our new cutscene ready, let's add the set. Up here in the library, I'm going to search for the set that I want. Now I know that Brett created his map on the Xeris tile set, and I want our cutscene to take place on the Xeris story mode set while Kerrigan is looking out from the Leviathan, just like she did in the campaign. So I'm going to search for a Leviathan set, and I'm just going to double-click each entry here to add the pieces of the Leviathan. Next, I'm going to search for a Xeris set, and I'm going to double-click each of the entries here for the Xeris set. All right, so here in the viewport, notice how everything is kind of misaligned. That's because whenever you add an object, it always adds it to wherever you're looking at. However, our story mode set pieces are built in a way that they should all be at the exact same position. So I'm going to just Control-click each of the models here. And in the property sheet, notice how there's dashes here for the position value. That's because they're all different values, but I can double-click and zero each of these out to have everything line up properly. So now as we look around into our set, we can see everything is nice and lined up. The next thing I want to do is stay organized. It's very important as your cutscene grows to keep everything organized so that you know where everything is. I'm going to do that by clicking this Add Folder button up here, and I'm going to right-click and rename to Set. I can then click and drag all of these models here right in the scene timeline and drag them into the set, and now they're in this folder. Great, so I select the set here. Another thing to notice is out in the viewport, we have Zeratul Spaceship and Zervin here in the background. Well, we don't actually want them in our scene because they're not a part of the story that we're trying to tell. So all I have to do here is I can click on Zervin here, and notice here in the list it became selected. I can uncheck him here, and that will hide him. I'll do the same to Zeratul. If I know I'm definitely not going to use these pieces at all, I can also just remove them by selecting both of them and choosing Remove Selected Items. Finally, I want to lock all of these models here so that I don't make accidental changes to them later. So I can right-click this folder here and choose Lock, which will lock the folder and all of its contents. I can tuck that away now. Next, I want to add the characters. So we have Kerrigan and Zagara in our scene. So like before, I'm going to search for Kerrigan, scroll down, and find the story mode Kerrigan. Double-click. In fact, this is not the correct model, so I'm going to select it and hit the Delete key, and choose this one instead. I'm also going to do the same for Zagara. double-click on Zagara story mode asset. And notice again, they're way out there in the distance, but we want them to be in the Leviathan. To do that, I'm going to set my camera to be inside the Leviathan so I can move them into there. So I go to the View menu, go to Camera, and notice how all of the cameras are listed here. This camera menu will show every camera in your set. Now these cameras here came automatic with the Leviathan set model, but as we add new cameras to our scene, they'll also go here. So select Camera Main here, and that puts us inside the Leviathan. I'm going to use button 4 here to target the ground, to kind of look at that, and then Alt Middle to get a bit more of an overview shot so I can see better where she's going to be standing. Now I can select Kerrigan's model down here, and holding Control Shift and click, I will move her to wherever I want. And I can drag to kind of move her around, until I'm happy with the position, right about there. I'll do the same with Zagara, select her, and Control Shift click anywhere on here. You can also position characters with these manipulators here. There are 3 major manipulators: translation, rotate, and scale. So with translation selected, I can pull on any of these axes here to position her, make sure she's not clipping with the ground. Same with Kerrigan. I also know that I want them to be looking outside the Leviathan. So we can rotate them by choosing the rotation manipulator here and pulling on this axis here to rotate her around. Again, I'll do the same with Zagara. Right about there. Another thing is that Kerrigan here is actually Deserged Kerrigan, but I want the infested Kerrigan instead. If I select the Kerrigan model here, you'll notice there's a model link property. This is the ID of the model that we've chosen. Now, I could delete this model and add her again, but because I've already got her positioned, all I want to do is swap the model out. And I'll do that by double-clicking in here and typing in the ID. I happen to know what it is, but you can look it up in the library as well. There we go. There's one more character I want to add, and that's a Terran dropship. The Terran dropship is going to fly across the screen as Kerrigan is looking out. So to do that, I'm going to first use Control middle mouse to pull up outside of the Leviathan. Kind of look down on a decent establishing shot for where the dropship's going to be flying across from. So something kind of like that looks good. Then I'm going to search for the dropship, and we'll choose the blue dropship. That adds the dropship to the middle of the screen here. I'll rotate it around so it's kind of flying away from us, and use the manipulator to pull it a little bit higher, something around there. Now, I want to make sure that Kerrigan can see the dropship from her point of view. So if we go to View, Camera, Camera Main, we can see what that looks like. All right, not bad, but maybe a little bit higher up will look good. All right, great. The next thing I want to do is actually have the dropship animate across the screen. First, I'm going to kind of target the dropship, since I know that's where I'm looking. Control middle mouse to look up, Alt middle down to rotate around, and look something like this. All right, so now I want to talk about keyframing. Keyframing animation is something that we can do to change the value of any property over time. Keyframes are heavily used in all sorts of different 3D applications, and we use them here. So the basic idea is I can add one key at one time with a value, add another key at a different time with a value, and that property will animate over time as time progresses. The easiest way to set up keyframing is to use Auto Key. Auto Key is this button here, which I can turn on by pressing this button. Notice the big red borders to let you know that you're in Auto Key mode. So now, while Auto Key mode is on, everything I do will change the property at that time and automatically add a key at that time. For instance, I'm going to take this dropship here. I'm going to move it down to kind of its starting position, right about there. Notice how it added keys at time 0 here. Now I can take my time, move across to about the 3-second mark, take the dropship, and move it out far away. And now that added more keys here with different values. If I turn off Auto Key and kind of scrub back, notice how the dropship animates over time. I can use the spacebar to hit play and see it fly across. Great. Let's make sure this looks good from Kerrigan's point of view by going to View, Camera, Camera Main again, and playing it back again. All right, not bad, except notice how the dropship didn't go all the way out of the view. To fix that, all we need to do is go back to the dropship here. I'll use button 4 to kind of target it again. And if I take the time and put it over these keys, just like that, I can take the dropship and just move it even further away. And notice how it updates the values down in the timeline. I also think the dropship was moving a little bit too fast, so I can just take these keys here in the timeline and make them last a little bit longer. We'll go about to the 5-second mark. I can drag these objects here to give myself some more room in the scene, and now put that about 5 seconds out. All right, let's go back to Kerrigan's point of view and play this back from the beginning. All right, we got a dropship flying across the screen. So one final thing we're going to do is to stay organized again. I'm going to add another folder, use F2 to rename it to characters, and then I'm going to use Shift to select these guys and drag them right into characters. All right, so in the next section, we're going to talk about the director node and start setting up our cameras. Now we're going to go over the director node and start setting up our cameras. The director node is a special scene-level object that helps control the flow of our cutscene. You can think of the director just like the director on a television set that will say something like, cut to camera A, cut to camera B, fade out the lights. The director node in our cutscene editor does the exact same role. So to add a director, go to Object, Add Node, Director. This adds a new director here. I like to keep my director right at the top of our scene, so I'm going to drag and select it right up here. All right, so now we have a director, but the director doesn't do anything by himself. You can right-click here and add all sorts of different control nodes to the director. The most important of which is the Add Active Camera node. The Active Camera node is the node that tells the cutscene when to cut to which camera. So to cut to a camera, we need to first create one. Let's go back to our view from before, the nice establishing shot we set. All right, something like that. I'm going to go back to the beginning of the time here, make sure our dropship here is where we like it, and I'll kind of move it up right about there. All right, so now let's add a camera. To do that, go to Object, Add Node, Camera. Now we have two kinds of cameras we can add to our scene, game cameras and target cameras. The only difference between them is the properties that they have. Game camera properties make it better for orbital camera animation, whereas target camera properties make it better for tracking type. We also have model cameras in our scene, but you can't add those because they come automatically with any models you add to your scene. So in this case, I'm going to add a game camera. Select game camera there, and I'm going to rename this to establishing to keep organized. And you'll notice this added a camera that we're currently looking through. If I kind of pull out here, you can see this camera object is kind of pointing out towards where I was before. You can always look through any camera by right-clicking it and choosing View Camera, or hitting the V key. If you move your camera after that, you're just moving what you're currently seeing, which puts you back in user mode. Now, if you want to set the current viewport to any camera, you can right-click and choose Set Camera, or Alt-V. And that sets the camera to what you're currently looking at again. Finally, you can also right-click and go to Edit Camera. And what this does is all changes to the viewport immediately go to the camera. And this is really useful for auto key, which you'll see later. All right, so let's get this right where we want it, right about there. Right-click and turn off Edit Camera. All right, now we can use this camera for the director. Right-click the active camera node and choose Add Camera Cut, and select the establishing camera we just created. That added a camera cut element to the timeline. And what all that does is it tells the director when to cut to which camera. You can always see what the director is looking through by saying View, Camera, Director. In addition, if you go to Window, Director Window, this gives you a separate window that's always looking out through the director camera to show you what the game is going to show when played back. A lot of people keep this on their second monitor so they can always monitor what things look like. I'm going to close this for now. All right, so we've got one camera cut. Now let's add another. So after the dropship flies by, we want to go back into the Leviathan. Go to View, Camera, Camera Main for the Leviathan. And this time I want to get a little bit closer on Kerrigan while still being behind her. Just kind of looking out on the Leviathan. Something like that. Again, I can go to Object, Add Node, Game Camera, And this adds a camera from where I'm looking at from this moment. I'll rename this to Behind Kerrigan. And now, right-click Active Camera and do a camera cut to behind Kerrigan. If I look through the director again by hitting the D hotkey, I can play our cutscene back to see what that looks like. All right, not bad. However, I thought that the camera cut was a little bit slow, so all I have to do is take this key here and move it earlier. Let's play that back. Much better. You can see by visually moving things on the timeline, you can iterate really fast while building your cutscene. Let's add a fade into the director. Move the timeline back to the beginning, right-click the director, and choose Add Fade. This adds a fade element to our scene that when we play back, causes a nice fade in. You can stretch this block here to control the speed of the fade in. So I'm going to make it a little bit shorter and play it back again. All right, so that's it for this section. In the next section, we're going to start adding dialogue and building out the story of our cutscene. In this section, we'll be adding dialogue and building out the story of our cutscene. One of the cool things you can do with the cutscene editor is use existing dialogue from the previous campaigns to build out a new story. Now, I've already gone through and identified the dialogue lines that I want, but it's a good idea to do that before you finish the story of your scene. To do that, go to the data editor and browse the sound data. The data editor is this icon up here. To look at sounds, click the plus tab here and choose Sound Data from the Art and Sound menu. Make sure you're in Detail View up here. Then you can search for any of the sounds you want here. For instance, if you want a Kerrigan line, search for Kerrigan, kind of scroll down here. All of our sounds are organized by the type of conversation it is, the conversation it's in, and who the speaker is. So once you have one selected, press the play button here to audition it.
Well then, why don't we let it out to play?
So you can go through all the sounds here and figure out what existing sound you want to use. Of course, you can always import your own sound that you've recorded yourself using the import module. All right, so now that we know what sounds we want, let's add them to our scene. First, let's select the characters folder to bring up our characters. And I'm going to select Kerrigan here. With Kerrigan selected, I can right-click her and choose Add Conversation Node. A conversation node is a special node that allows you to play back dialogue. It automatically handles playing the sound, performing lip syncing, and adding the subtitles if the user has selected that option. Now with the conversation node selected, go to Sounds, and we're going to search for the sound we want. In this case, it's Egg Monster Kerrigan 34. Double-click the sound to add it to your scene, and you'll get an orange block here. We can play it back.
The Dominion. What are they doing here?
All right, so you can see she's now speaking. I'm going to give ourselves some more room in our scene by pulling that out over there. And now listen to the dialogue line again.
The Dominion.
The only thing is, in this story that we're trying to tell, it's not the Dominion that's attacking Kerrigan, but that's an easy fix. You can select the conversation block here, and notice there's a property called Start Offset. Setting this value will cause the sound to start in the middle of the sound. So I can double-click in here and type in 500 for 500 milliseconds, and that causes the sound to start half a second in from the start of the sound. Let's play it back.
Minion. What are they doing here?
OK, that's close, but not quite what we wanted. Now let's select it again and type in the completely not staged value of 1740. And play this back.
What are they doing here?
Perfect. Nice and clean. What are they doing here? We can trim off the end of our element here since we don't need this entire block. And let's play it back again.
What are they doing here?
Great. So now let's add our next dialogue line. This case is going to be Kerrigan 016 from the debrief char 01 scene. Debrief char 01. And before I add this, though, I'm going to do a little trick here. Right-click Kerrigan and add a second conversation node. What this does is it allows me to layer these one after the other without worrying about the blocks overlapping. So I can double-click the debrief now and have these overlap for a little bit better pacing. Let's play this back.
What are they doing here? Tell me, Zagara, how would you drive the Terrans from this world?
Great. So this feels like a great spot to do another camera cut, in particular looking at Kerrigan. So to do that, use button 4 again to target Kerrigan's head, and let's spin around and get more of a medium shot of Kerrigan, kind of looking at Zagara in the shot as well. Great. Go to View, Object, Add Node, Game Camera. Let's call this one Kerrigan Zagara. I'm going to use Control to add the director below here so we can see it. And I think right as she starts speaking her line, we want to add the camera cut. So I'll select the ruler, right-click, Add Camera Cut, Kerrigan Zagara. Let's play this back. Oh, always make sure that you're looking through the director while you're playing it back. It's a D hotkey. You'll get used to hitting that often.
What are they doing here? Tell me, Zagara, how would you drive the Terrans from this world?
All right, now let's add Zagara's response. In this case, that is Rogue Queen 21 on the Char 01 debrief. All right, and go to Zagara here and add her conversation node. Right-click, Add Conversation. With that selected, double-click this. All right, I can kind of tell that it's probably going to be a little slow, so let's have them overlap. In general, it's a good idea to have your dialogue overlap for better pacing. Now let's play this back.
I would obliterate their fortress on the Dauntless Plateau, but the only way to reach it is through the Bone Trench.
All right, that's a little bit too much detail for what we want, so let's chop off the end of this. I can just drag this in and play it again.
I would obliterate their fortress on the Dauntless.
Okay, not quite. Let's use the mouse wheel to zoom in a little bit closer. Drag this a little bit further out until we get this just right.
I would obliterate their fortress.
A little bit more.
I would obliterate their fortress.
And we're good. All right, I'm going to add a couple more lines here, but we're going to speed it up for this tutorial. All right, so now that our new lines are in, let's watch this back and add the final camera cuts.
Tell me, Zagara, how would you drive the Terrans from this world?
All right, this is a good time for a Zagara close-up. Button 4, zoom in. Right about there, and choose Object, Add Node, Game Camera. Zagara close-up. Right-click Active Camera, cut to Zagara close-up. Let's keep going.
World.
I would obliterate their fortress.
We need...
All right, timing's a bit off. We'll move these out and add a camera cut back to Kerrigan. This time we're going to use the same one from before, the Kerrigan Zagara cut.
I would obliterate their fortress.
We need to move fast. I'm taking control of the Hive cluster right now.
All right, so I want to do a camera cut to Kerrigan right here. We're going to do a close-up on Kerrigan to finish up the cutscene. Zoom in on her face and get a nice close-up. All right, notice what's happening here. This is what we call a near clip, and it's very easy to fix. So I want to frame it right about there or so. If I go to View Camera Editor, I can just take this near clip and bring it down a little bit. The near clip and far clip tell the camera how far or close things need to be in order to be visible. So in this case, I just need to bring this down a bit, and now we can see Kerrigan again. All right, going back to our camera work, Object, Add Node, Game Camera. We will rename this to Kerrigan Close-Up. Right-click Active Camera, and choose that. I'm going to exit the camera window, go back to the director, and watch the rest of the scene.
I would obliterate their fortress.
We need to move fast. I'm taking control of the Hive cluster right now. Let's test out these new banelings.
All right, one final thing I want to fix is it's a little bit slow going into this dialogue line. So we're going to move them in, move the camera cut in, and I believe we are done.
We need to move fast. I'm taking control of the Hive cluster right now. Let's test out these new banelings.
All right, so you can see it's pretty easy to add dialogue to your cutscene and to get an entire story built out. In the next section, we'll be going through fine-tuning this to really polish this cutscene and bring it to life. In this section, we're going to be fine-tuning our cutscene, adding some sounds, fixing up some animation, and really bringing it to life. So let's get back to our cutscene. Notice how the dropship flies by. It doesn't have any sound. Let's add some for that. Now, I can add the current medevac dropship movement sound to this. However, that's a 3D sound, and it makes it kind of hard to work with when you have to make sure the camera is nearby in order to hear the sound. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a duplicate of that sound and mark it as 2D. To do that, go to the data editor and search for medevac. Find the medevac movement sound, and let's play it back to make sure we like it. All right. Now, right-click this to duplicate it and choose OK. Let's rename this by double-clicking and renaming it to medevac movement 2D. Now, over here on the detail view, change the mode from 3D world relative to 2D. And that's the sound we want. Go ahead and save your cutscene or your map. And let's go back to the cutscene editor. Under Sounds, search for medevac. And you'll find the medevac movement 2D sound we just created. Set your cursor back to the beginning of the scene and double-click to add this sound. Notice the yellow block there for this generic sound type. Now let's play back our cutscene. All right.
What are they doing here?
That looks pretty good. The only thing is, though, that the sound comes on a little abruptly as the cutscene fades in. That's another easy thing to fix. Right-click the medevac movement and choose Add Property Layer, Volume. What this does is it allows us to change the value of the volume property over time. So you can see we have a key here. Let's move that back to the beginning. And then, actually, to stay organized, I don't care about the characters right now. I just want to see the director and the sound. OK. And then at the end of the fade, I'm going to move the timeline there, right-click the property, and choose Add Value. So now we have two keys here. This first key here, I'm going to select it and change the value property to 0. And what this does is now the value of the volume will change from 0 to 1 in a linear fashion as the scene begins. All right, that feels pretty good. Now, there is one little thing of polish I want to do, and that is I want to kind of smooth out the curve of that property. To do that, I can open the curve editor. With the property volume selected, I can open up this curve editor. And this shows you the shape of how that value changes over time. You might recognize this from various animation software. What I can do is I can select both of these keys and change to auto so that it sounds nice and smooth as it changes over time. Let's play this back again. I'm going to hit D to make sure I'm looking through the director this time. All right. Now, another thing that's common is as the camera backed away from the dropship, we probably want to make the dropship quieter from this point of view. That's another thing we can do in the curve editor. So let's go back to the curve editor. I'm going to zoom out a little bit, pan with middle mouse button, and OK, we can see the current time is over there. Great. Now, if I go to Create, this changes my mode to Create mode so that any key I add will be at that moment and value that I click on. So right here, actually back here, at this moment in time, I want to add a new key, dropping the volume to about, maybe 60% or so. OK. Now notice how that value is actually changing over time in a curve to that. Well, that's not what we want. We want the dropship to hold a constant volume as it plays, and then suddenly drop off when the camera cuts. That's also easy to do by selecting the Edit mode here, selecting this key, and changing it to Step. And you can see the shape of the curve now, hold steady, and then suddenly drops off at the camera cut. So let's see what that sounds like. All right. That sounds pretty good. Next, I want to add some animation to Kerrigan to kind of bring her to life. So I'm going to now select the Director node and Kerrigan. Expand Kerrigan. And during this dialogue line, just as she speaks to Zagara, I want her to turn towards her. So let's play this back to find the right time.
Doing here? Tell me, Zagara.
All right, so maybe right about here, we want her to start turning. So move your time to here. And we're going to add a new animation block to change from the current animation to a different one. So right-click the animation layer and choose Add Animation Block. And this adds a new block to your scene. So we've got this stand, and this stand. I'm going to change this one to a turn left animation. So I can right-click it, choose Change Animation, and choose Stand Left. All right, let's play that back.
What are they doing here? Tell me, Zagara.
All right, that was a little bit fast as she turned towards her. See this gray area here? This shows us the blend from going from one animation to the other. We can change that value here in the blend in time for the animation block. So I'm going to double click this and choose 500 milliseconds. So it'll take her about a half second to turn towards Zagara. Let's play this back.
What are they doing here? Tell me, Zagara, how would you drive the Terrans?
Great. Now that we have this animation in here, I want the camera to cut while she's in the middle of that movement. Let's do this again.
What are they doing here? Tell me, Zagara.
All right, that feels nice and natural. Next, we want Zagara to play an animation as she speaks. So I'm going to select Zagara here. And zoom out.
How would you drive the Terrans from this world?
I would obliterate their fortress.
So there are two different kinds of animation for speaking. We have facial animation, which is lip syncing for characters. But in this case here, I want to add a body talk animation. So move the cursor to right at the camera cut, right-click the animation layer, and choose Add Animation Block. Right-click the stand animation, and change that to talk. And let's play that back.
From this world.
I would obliterate their fortress.
All right. Not bad, but did you notice the kind of jump as the camera cut?
I would obliterate.
All right, that's for two reasons. One, we need to get rid of the blend in the animation. Because we have a camera cut happening at this moment in time, we can actually do a little bit of movie magic and just have her jump to that animation. It doesn't matter if it doesn't line up because the camera cut masks it. So select this talk anim, change the blend in time to 0. Also, select the previous animation and make sure that blend out is 0. The other thing is the change in animation doesn't line up perfectly with the camera cut. We can fix that by resizing the previous animation, and notice that black line there shows us what we're snapping to. Now we're snapping to the camera cut perfectly. We'll do the same to line this next animation up. Let's play that back.
I would obliterate their fortress.
We need to move.
All right, much better. We're going to do the same for the end to clean that up, line it up, and get rid of the blend out of the talk and the blend in on the stand. Play it back.
Obliterate their fortress.
We need to move fast.
All right, looks nice and natural. Finally, I want to add some emotion to Kerrigan's final line. I think a nice smile at the end to kind of give it a creepy look as she talks about the Banelings. So let's go to the final line here.
Banelings.
All right, and right before it ends, I want to add another animation. Now, the way our animation system works is we can have multiple animation layers, and they can all play simultaneously on a character, so long as the animations were built that way. And our facial animations for emotion were built like that. So right-click Kerrigan Actor and choose Add Animation Layer. This adds a new layer here of a stand animation. We're going to shrink that down to just the end of the cutscene. Let's give it a little bit more room at the end. And now I can right-click this animation and choose Change. If I scroll down here, I'll find a Happy Eyes animation. You can see all the different emotions here. In this case, I want happy. All right, let's see what this looks like.
Test out these new Banelings.
All right, so we got some timing issues. Let's trim off the end.
Test out these new Banelings.
Perfect. A little bit shorter. And bring the happy eyes right to overlapping like that. Also, did you notice how fast she smiled? Let's slow down that blend again to about 500.
Let's test out these new Banelings.
All right, nice and creepy look. While we're working at the end of our scene, let's add our fade out. Just like before, I can right-click the fade and choose Add Fade Out. And that adds a fade out block right at the end of our scene here. All right. And finally, I think this final Baneling line will look a lot better if the camera zooms in as she speaks it. So to do that, I'm going to select the director, Kerrigan, and Kerrigan close-up for our timeline. And I'm going to use auto key to change how the camera changes over time. So if I enter auto key mode here, and then right-click the camera and choose Edit, all of the changes I make while moving my camera will apply to this camera in auto key mode. So if I choose my starting zoom, I can just kind of wiggle the camera here. And that will add a whole bunch of keys for all the properties of the camera. I then go to the end of the line, choose where I want to zoom into. Maybe about there or so. And remember, we have to fix the near clip on this camera by going to the camera editor and bringing that in. Great. Turn off auto key and turn off edit camera. And let's play this back.
Now, let's test out these new banelings.
All right, a couple little final touches on this. You can click and drag to select all of these keys. And if we wanted to change the curve on that, we have a shortcut. Instead of bringing up the curve editor, I can just right-click and change the in and out tangent of all of these keys right here. So that causes a nice smooth curve as the camera moves.
Let's test out these new banelings.
All right, and the only other issue is that I think it's zooming a little bit too fast. So let's select these end ones, push them out a bit, select these in ones, and push them in a bit. Let's watch this back.
Taking control of the hive cluster right now. Let's test out these new banelings.
Let's add a finishing touch of lighting to our scene. We've got two main types of lights in our cutscene. We've got environment light and local lights. Environment lights you can think of kind of like the sun, and they set the main ambience of the scene. Local lights are kind of like light bulbs and spotlights that you can place to give a specific area more or less light. So in this case, I'm going to add an environment light. Right-click the director node and choose Add Active Light Node. An active light node is just like an active camera node, except it chooses the current active light. Let's move this out of the fade and switch to our director camera. All right. Now all of our sets have lighting built specifically for them. So in this case, let's go find the Xeris light. I go to Window, Lighting. I can scroll up here, and under Story Mode, Sets, Zerg, we can find the Xeris light. So this here is the Xeris set light, SMX1 Xeris set. That's what we'll need. Now I can right-click the active light node, choose Add Light, and I'm going to change the value from Belshir to SMX1 Xeris set. All right, so everything's a little bit more vibrant, and that's what the artist wanted Xeris to look like. I'll move this back to the beginning, and let's play this back. Notice how everything's darker now. All of our sets were designed to be lit with local lights, so the environment light is just giving it a basic glow, but we need to add spotlights to really light our scene. To do that, go to Object, Add Node, Add Light, Spot. A spotlight is like a spotlight that you would expect to see on a stage, and an omnilight is kind of like a light bulb. All right, so that adds this light cone to our scene. I'm going to zoom out here, and you notice I can move the light around, of course. Now, lights are usually easier to operate in these different lighting mode. So this here will allow you to move the light as a whole. But you can also move the light eye and the light target separately. To do that, select the eye manipulator mode, and this moves around just the eye without changing the target. I'm going to back this out a little bit towards the camera. And target manipulator mode will allow you to move just the target without moving the eye. All right, so I'm going to take this whole thing here now, kind of back it out a little bit, take the target, hit her, and make sure Zagara is getting a little bit of light too. So lighting is a pretty advanced topic that requires an artistic eye and a lot of time, so we're not going to go into lighting this scene perfectly. But you can look at the tutorial map that we have to see how we finished off this scene. And so that's it. So you can see it's pretty easy to create a high-quality cutscene to use in your map. In the final section, I'll show you exactly how you can set up a trigger to play this back in-game. In this final section, we're going to go over how to export your cutscene as a video or how to play it back as a trigger in your map. So to record video, all you have to do is set your cursor back to the beginning of the cutscene, Make sure you're in director mode. And also, you probably want to get rid of all of the extra drawing, like the manipulator, everything. You can go to Render, Show Helpers, and turn off the decorators. That gives you a nice clean look. The other thing you want to do is go to View, Viewport Size, and set the viewport to the size you want to render to. In this case, we're going to choose 640 by 360. Now I can set the timeline back to the beginning and push the record button up here. This will allow you to create a video file that you can use to share online with your friends. Now, normally you will want to use compression, so that will create a Y4M file and a WAV file that will contain all the video and audio information. If you're not familiar with this file, any standard video conversion tool will help put this into an AVI or movie file. If you don't use compression, this will generate a series of TGA image files that you can then import into whatever video software you like. However, audio is not recorded in this style, and it's assumed that audio is done in post. In this case, I'm going to use compression and press OK. It's going to start playing back stuttery, and the sound might sound funny, but that's OK. The final video will look correct. In this case, I'm going to stop this. All right. So that's one way to share your cutscene. Another way is to actually play it back in your map, just like we did in our campaigns. To do that, open the Triggers module here, just like Brett showed you earlier. Now, I've actually added a number of actions here that are necessary for playing our cutscene. You can go to our tutorial map to see exactly what they are, but I'll go over them briefly. The most important of which is Create Cutscene. This is the actual action that will play back the cutscene, and you can find it under the Cutscene category of all actions. There are several other actions here that are necessary for playing back cutscenes and controlling them. Next, we have Wait for Cutscene. This says pause this trigger until the cutscene is created, which is necessary so that these other things don't happen until the cutscene is complete. Now, the rest of these are all about setting up prior to the cutscene and cleaning up after the cutscene. So prior to it, the main idea is we want to pause all the units, hide everything in the world, and then play the cutscene. In the same way, at the end of the cutscene, we want to turn everything back on and turn the units back on, unpause them at the end. All right, so let's see what this looks like by hitting Test Document.
Armed and ready. Gangway coming through. Go, go, go! Outstanding. Keep your shirt on, Sparky.
All right, so here comes the ambush. We're going to walk around the corner here.
What are they doing here? Tell me, Zagara, how would you drive the Terrans from this world?
I would obliterate their fortress.
We need to move fast. I'm taking control of the Hive Cluster right now. Let's test out these new banelings.
All right, so there's our cutscene. Ambush begins. All right, once you're satisfied, you can publish your map and share your cutscene with all your friends. I hope you really enjoyed these series of tutorials. I can't wait to see all of your awesome cutscenes up on Battle.net.